Continuing now with everyday objects, I've got my pail with water and I've got my mop. It's a cartoon type scene, and I'm going to create a sponge to put on the floor. And I've got other ideas for some other stuff as well. So let's just go ahead and make the sponge here. So let's create the shape for the sponge using a cube. And that ought to do right there. Okay, so now let's put on a bevel. And I'm going to give it a few segments, and I want it nice and round for this. All right, I'll put on weighted normal and normal auto smooth as well. And that is going to be my sponge. Okay, so I'm going to UV unwrap this with Smart UV Project. And then I'm going to come over to the shading tab. I'll create a new material and I'll call this sponge. And I'm going to need a Voronoi texture, and I'll press Control T and I'll use UV coordinates there. And we're going to refer to this image here, which will make it a little easier for me to remember and for you to see some of the stuff as well. So I've got the UV coming into the mapping. Voronoi texture, I'm going to use a scale of about 20. I'm leaving everything else the same. Come into a color ramp with the black and the white relatively close there. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's set the scale to 20 and bring in a color ramp here. We'll use distance. Black will bring it up to about the arrow, and white a little bit past that. They'll be relatively close. All right, now if I shift click on that, you can start to see what we're getting, to sort of the holes that will represent the holes in the sponge. Okay, so back to here. Now we'll have to get a bunch of these pieces done before you'll actually see the effect. I'll go ahead and I'll do the other noise as well. So we're going to have a noise texture here. These are two math nodes that are going to connect those to a bump, which will go into the normal. All right, so let's go ahead and do the noise. Let's just take this and Shift D to copy it, and then Shift S to change it to a noise texture. And that's going to go into a math node. So let's bring one of those in Converter Math. It will be Add, I believe, and we'll bring this one down here, and we'll bring this color one in here. Those two are going into the values there, and we'll have another math node set to Multiply that can control that. Let's bring that another one down here, and let's change that to Multiply. Put that on a value about 0.4. And these are going to feed into a vector bump. So Shift A, vector bump down here, value into the height, and the normal into the normal. And I'm going to leave that at 1. Now we're not seeing much yet, so hang on. Let's just come back to the principal shader. There you can start to see the effect of the noise on here. So okay, we can go ahead and adjust the scale of that based on this. So I'm going to use 100 and the detail at 16. 100 and the detail at 16. So quite high for that. All right, and that's about all you're going to see for the moment. So now we're going to come up here. Now I'm going to add an RGB node. Now that one I always forget where it is, so I'll just do RGB. And we're going to set this on a sort of a nice yellowish color. And we'll use a mix RGB to bring that in. That's going to go into the first slot. I can go ahead and plug that in so we can start seeing some color there. A little bit of color. And I'm going to set that on Multiply. So now you're starting to see the effects of that. And I'm going to use some ambient occlusion to make these, what are sort of like holes, a bit more prominent. So I'm going to bring in an ambient occlusion node here. And that one is going to feed into the second one there. And we use another math node here, a power. So Shift A, Converter Math, drop that in there and change that to power. And then you can up and down that quite easily. And I'll put that on about 0.6. And that's at 0.5 multiplied, power 0.6, we've got that. But what we really want is we want to feed the bump into that ambient occlusion to the normal. And that will help us as well. All right, so that is close to what we're going to get out of this. The other thing that I would like to do is add some subsurf. I'm going to try 0.3, and I'm going to make this sort of an orangey color. Let's go back to layout where we should be able to see this a little bit nicer. And that is pretty much the sponge that I'm getting. So it's going to depend on the lighting, depending on the size of yours and the settings and stuff. But hopefully that could pass as a cartoon sponge. And that would be, you know, nice enough for a little prop in this evolving scene. All right, let's just go back and double check everything here. I've done this, I've done that. That's at 1. I've done this. And I just want to see if I wanted to pinch those together a little bit more or if they're pretty good. I think they're pretty good where they are. And that'll create just subtle differences. But there's the sponge. All right, it's not using the displacement that you would get out of cycles. It's not using Eevee next or next Eevee displacement. It's just sort of mimicking it. But I think it's going to look okay and fit the scene. All right, so like I say, I've got other things planned for the scene, so hope you'll come on back for more of this cartoon version of Everyday Objects.